We're on time. I think we've got it. We're going to do a sound check here. Talita, let me know if we're okay. See if you can log in and check on this. I think we're good to go. We're on time, even a moment early. We're just going to let this kind of ride through. We really like the YouTube app here. It just took a minute to get used to about planning ahead and then how to synchronize up and link into this call. So we think we've got it. We are live, and um, we're going to continue to ramp this up in terms of sophistication, cinematography, all these things. We've seen some neat podcasts that are out there, and we're going to gain speed on that. And in the meantime, we're going to do similar to what we had in the SpaceX's Telegram kind of thing. We also had the um, uh, Google Meets that we do as a company, and those have kind of turned into more used for other meetings, but also internal meetings for the company. So we're going to really make YouTube kind of the go-to event for us, and we're going to continue to ramp this up, and hopefully even eventually have guests and other videos. We'll do things from job sites, everything else. So thank you everyone for your patience as we kind of ramp up in the multimedia space here. We know that um, in this front, there's kind of two things we're sort of behind the curve on with respect to modern activities or what our goals are. And one of those is raising capital, right? And that's been a big hot topic. And I'm going to talk about more of that about that tonight. And it's fun and exciting, and it's kind of been a dichotomy because it's the one thing, when we look at what is currency, right, is consensus, right? Isn't that kind of what Bitcoin proved, and what the whole fiat money already does? Paper money is really not worth anything, but you trade it in and you exchange it because you believe that it's going to allow you to buy something else later, or the person takes it because they can go buy something else. And that's what currencies are. It's just reaching consensus. And you look for the ones with the least red tape, the least bureaucracy, right? And that's why the blockchain space has so much potential, because you're in this scenario where you have uh, the um, the concept of no government control. There's no one there that's motivated to make it bureaucratic. See, this is while I get on this, and we're kind of waiting for folks to come in, and we'll see who shows up tonight. But this is being recorded. Um, One of the things that we need to understand as human beings wherever we go is that it's not that currency's bad, right? A lot of people just want to be like an anarchist and just say, well, anything involving a government's bad or whatever. But that's not the bad part. You can have good leaders in a country. We were just talking, Brad Whitaker and I, and with Caesar Martin, and we kind of on the money topic, because we're always kind of battling this issue in raising capital because people are afraid to spend. They're afraid of infrastructure. They don't understand technology. We wrestle over this. We just did a couple of business plans for a pair of projects over in Africa, one in East Africa, one in West Africa. You'll hear about those soon. Pretty neat stuff, things we've been working on developments of a long time. Finally, an investor said, I want to do those two, right here and right here. So he said, give me a business plan. Well, we have tons of different business plans. We're always putting pitch decks together and presentations, proposals, everything. And it's always that wrestling match, because right nowadays, a lot of investors, and if any of you listen to this or don't, whoever you're talking to, there's a lot of people involved with investment that don't really know much about anything. And there's a point where, I'm going to go out on a limb here, because I forget who said this, but years ago, there's a lot more philosophers that don't know anything about science than there are engineers who don't know about history, right? It's okay to learn about a lot of things. And I get it. A lot of people are bored by math or science and they don't really study that, and that's fine. But there's a point where there's a responsibility as a human being. Some people say, I don't care about electricity as long as I flip the switch and the light goes on. You know what? That's fine, but it's really not. At least develop a modicum that somebody else does know and understand those things. See, that's what intelligent people do. You can say, well, I don't really like this topic, but a smart person says someone's good at it, so I better at least acknowledge that there's a topic. Sometimes knowledge is based on just at least knowing that you don't know something. There's a lot of things I don't know about. I'm not a musician. I love music. I love Baroque music, classical music. I love rock and roll, reggae. There's just great. It's just a creative art. It's a universal language. The octave. It's incredible. And I can read music, but I don't play it. And I'd have to be going slow, and pick it up and all these different things. But I know that it's there so I can appreciate it and I can pick up little bits and pieces. I don't say, well, I don't play music, so I'm going to walk away. I understand it. I think when we segued into this gets into polymathism and what I'm going to get on here. I know we're maybe just starting. I'm going to give a link out to everybody, let them know we're here. And thank you, Talita, for the sound check. What it boils down to is Ronald Reagan. I'm gonna talk about Ronald Reagan tonight. Isn't that cool? What a cool topic. And I'm going to tell you why. Because a lot of people just say, oh, they like this particular politician because this, that, or the other thing. And, it's easy to kind of choose sides and look at values. And we should, vote for people that you trust and respect at least a little bit. Sometimes it's hard to trust any of them, right? But then what are you doing about it? Right? If all you do is complain about something, it's called being a jerk, isn't it? But what love does is gets involved and makes a change. And that can be difficult. But what I want to say about Ronald Reagan, because this goes back to a worldview. See, Ronald Reagan, it was heavily criticized because, like, what is it? An actor is going to become a president, or become a politician. And I think fundamentally, and I'll say this I know there's a lot of different commentary about all the things. I'm not going to really get into the politics here. I'll just leave it this way. We need more politicians who aren't professional politicians, right? People go to law school and you get the degree and you learn about law and you end up running for office and you never really end up working a day of the week. There's all kinds of political officials all over the world who've never really done anything. They just become political leaders. I think that's a tragedy because inherently they're going to be out of touch with some form of reality where you're scrounging around to earn money make a living. You don't really understand commerce, different things. And I'm not saying you can't be a good leader without experiencing everything, but I think some of the best political officials are people who have a sense of real life. I love Lech Walesa from Poland. He's an electrician at the shipyards in Gdansk, and so he had he knew what it was like to be in those positions, so he could advocate for his people. Well, Ronald Reagan, as everyone knows, was an actor. Well, what was amazing is there's a great book. If anybody gets a chance to read it, it's pretty phenomenal. It's called The Education of Ronald Reagan. And what it was is I actually never saw the show. I wasn't born yet. I believe it was in the 50s and 60s. It was General Electric did an hour-long program that they sponsored, and it was talking about their industrial developments, things they were involved in, business, industry. And Ronald Reagan was their spokesman. He hosted the show and did it, and people knew his face and everything. Well, what's amazing is in Ronald Reagan's own words, I'm kind of paraphrasing, he said, I listened to what I was saying. He had a script and he listened. He's like, yeah, industry can be good. And General Electric was a great company. I'll go on Front Street and I'll defend this all the time. In 2017, GE Capital, who used to fund a lot of our projects, right? We're using GE turbines, GE engines, GE equipment. GE Capital had the great idea to say, let's form a banking group and we'll make loans that are for majority of our own equipment, right? They're going to make money selling the equipment and make interest on loans being paid back for the equipment. And obviously it was good collateral to them because it was equipment they were manufacturing. Collateral stuff, building stuff that can be used to do something good. And what was good? Well, machinery, turbines, engines, steam turbines, gas turbines, hospital equipment was their big thing. It's all kind of dismantled. I think the power division is still called GE Vernova. I think it is. And there's probably a lot of good stuff going on there still, but it's not the same. not the same at all. I mean, GE was a pioneer in things, and they went the same route. They'd rather do shenanigans in the back scene, manipulating the books and cooking books and stuff like that to create the image of doing more business, when in reality, the um, you're just lying. And it caught up to him. It's kind of like the Enron scandal, everything else, and we've lived through that because it hit the energy industry when Enron did their cook in the books, to trade gas and to the electric plants that they owned. Great business plan. Own the gas wells and own the electric plants that use the gas to make electricity. But what they did is the accountants on each side of the equation started fudging the numbers because they could, right? The gas guys would show higher sales and the electric guys wanted to show lower sales. And they kind of inched along, and pretty soon they were reporting numbers that were like anybody read their, you know, compare the annual report numbers and say, man, this doesn't make sense because you're reporting gas sales that would, you know, and be, you know, enormous numbers. And then over on the electric side, they're purporting gas sales that would make the heat rates impossible. There's no way you could generate that much electricity with that little amount of fuel. And so Wall Street caught wind of it, and they come down in there and realized bad, illegal record keeping fraud. And that's what's great about the blockchain. I think about those things sometimes because the blockchain has one immutable record. It's a pure system. And I've given speeches on that where you have a thing with, what is it, cryptography and currency. Sounds scary to put those two together, but really you want that protection. And I'll continue to advocate for it, guys and girls. The cryptocurrency space is really shooting its own foot off. All this pump and dump using AI bots to create sales and amp up volume. And people, it's like a video game, buy low, sell high, and everything's going to have a lifespan of, what, a day, a week, whatever. I mean, it's something you can do, but it's totally irresponsible. It's kind of like taking television and just, if you're going to have cartoons on it, at least make them good ones. Somebody was talking about Rick and Morty the other day or whatever. Do something creative, do something. But a lot of stuff in the crypto space is just foolishness, and then so people don't even recognize a real thing when it comes along. And we ran into that. We've talked enough about it. And see, we still love the blockchain. And I love the crypto space because it has potential, but it's kind of wasting it, right? I'll say that right now. Proof of Stake, Vitalik Buterin, awesome book. I'm the only person I know who's read it because who reads books anymore, right? Especially about cryptocurrency. There's another book, the Blockchain Revolution by a father and son team, that was a great book as well. And those are things I read. That's how I kind of learned about the blockchain, and its spirit of what it was founded on is awesome. This moral ethic principle. And then you get into the real thing and it's just foolish trading. And so what do? You mint a token and you got red flags everywhere. Not enough liquidity, not enough, too few amount of owners, too many owners own the percentage. You get all these red flags everywhere, and because they're expecting a rug pull. And that industry is never really going to get super healthy and mainstream and really reach its potential until enough people come in and say, hey, somebody minted a token. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they've got a good cause for it. And I think that industry is a long way from that. In fact, even the stock market's kind of gone that route too. Unfortunately, what they do is a barrier of entry, having a high cost to get in. They think that weeds out the illicit things too, and it really kind of doesn't, you know. And that's what's kind of sad about capital too. You have people with money afraid to invest in real assets because they can't tell the difference what are good ones or bad ones. And I'll talk about that here in a second with that. But when that happens, and the people with the financing can't tell what's good or bad, then you kind of invest in nothing. And that's why I can tell you this: looking around the world, infrastructure is falling apart globally. We've had the good fortune to be living in places that have good infrastructure and have been made investments to do that. But at the same time, um, there is there's a huge undertaking going on around the world that's really in my lifetime. Since those Ronald Reagan days of the 70s and 80s, when we've fallen away from just making common investments. And I saw it in America. electricity, power generation, no buffers anymore, roads, highways, all kinds of things. Just, not good, where you just don't have enough to make ends meet. And so what do people do? They blame the government. Taxes are going up, but no infrastructure is going in, and so it just becomes just a blame game all over the place. When in reality, private industry has as much responsibility as anything, and they're always looking for guarantees and tax credits and everything else. One of the things I'm really proud about Concentric, and this is going to come true, because it's baked into our business model. When I call this DEFCON strategy, and let me finish on Ronald Reagan first, and then I'll talk about the DEFCON. I'm kind of winging it here, and I'll do that. We're going to get some more structure in the shows. I'm actually wrapping up the resonance talks. I'm going to do 72 of them. They've been on TikTok and then posted elsewhere. And I'm going to kind of make this like the Resonance Weekly, connections with Concentric, James Burke's kind of theme there of making connections with science and stuff. But um, what Ronald Reagan did is he realized the value of free enterprise, what General Electric was doing, and that led to a lot of his economic principles. And that's why I think he was a really good leader. He advocated for a laissez-faire, hands off government, have a smaller government, and let business go do business. Now, people could complain and say, well, that meant imperialism. He's doing this and that and stuff. Yeah, but that's not free enterprise fault. It's amazing how some people have a bad experience and say, I got burned. It's funny because how many of you play sports or ran track or played a sport, rugby or football or, soccer or tennis or whatever, go golfing, and you had a bad teammate or some guy on your team was a jerk or something bad happened, a girl on your volleyball team wasn't nice and everyone had a problem. Well, you don't blame the sport, it's people's fault, right? But then in reality, what if people aren't the problem, but poverty is? What if putting people in certain situations draws out the worst? But my point is that, we get into things like, you talk about energy and infrastructure and building stuff, and you work with a bad contractor or somebody doesn't this. Does that mean the whole industry's bad? It's funny to me, like we're dealing with that in the Southern Hemisphere a lot right now. And I have tons of compassion. This DEFCON model we've put together: develop, engineer, finance, construct, operate, maintain. It's comprehensive, and it has to be. See, that was our resolution. We saw examples all across the Southern Hemisphere where uh, the infrastructure wasn't getting built up, and when it was exploitation based. The Northern Hemisphere just put, confessions of an economic hitman, debt trap, diplomacy, go into all those details. Check it out, read about it, because that's how it's gone. And it leaves everyone wanting, is what happens. See, that's what goes on with that, is that it leaves the resource exploited as on short term a basis as possible, and then nobody ends up winning in the long run, and those who made short term money just bail, and that's kind of what's happened a lot. But is that free enterprise fault? Not at all. It's people making some bad decisions when they have an opportunity to make good ones. And I think what I've discovered, and this is why I think why I know Concentric is going to be a solid organization, because it's based on its business principle that's cooked into how the whole model is. This DEFCON model is not only a moral meritocracy where it's work based and it's ethical based, right? The whole resonance talks are about that. It's not just about economic and ecological, but social and spiritual, right? We'd say what we do is energy, food, air, and water. Why we do it: economic, ecologic, social, spiritual success. And you need all those aspects. And a lot of people, you hear that and you think, what's he talking about? And what I'm talking about is even the point where you can turn labor, the employees, into something positive. See, this all out pension, people talk the bottom line. My deal is, if you're going to be greedy, be good at it. This whole thing of cutting out labor and getting cheap labor and doing this and going to do oil exploration and just dumping raw oil in it because the cost, you can save. That's nonsense. When you see these oil companies who let the crude oil spill out and they got spills and stuff, and they act like, well, we didn't have enough money to do it right and clean it up. If you treated the resource properly, you wouldn't want to drop an ounce of crude oil. See, when we do a waste to energy plant with the garbage and sewage, that those wastes are valuable to us. We don't want to let them go. We don't want to let them, go through, methane generation like the landfill gas projects. It's just a band aid. Yeah, put the garbage in the ground until it rots enough, and then we'll extract the methane and call it environmental. It's really not. And you have liners for the leachate stuff. No, that stuff's a fuel to start with. Let's use that land for parks and other things. And the point is there is a way to be cleaner and more profitable. Buckminster Fuller, if you want to smash a paradigm, come up with something that's enormously better. And that's what we've done. And we didn't do it just an idea like we need to be better. This evolved out of a commitment. I've talked about this before. You know what the inception of Concentric really was? It was excellence in power generation, just a vision for heat rate. It's a term in engineering thermodynamics for efficiency. The lower your heat rate means the less energy in to get what you want out, like electricity. So if you have a low heat rate, you're a high efficiency plant. And that was always our metric. It still is. It's a defining principle of how you design these things. So we're always trying to squeeze a joule or a therm or a BTU out of all this stuff. And that's what we got good at. And so we divert that to aquaponics or, heat, pre-drying incoming fuel, which is easy, just overall helping the energy balance on waste conversion. And so what happened over time was that led us to find ways cleaner and more profitable at the same time. I've talked about it before. I had an essay in the theft that just recently happened. I think all my copies of it got taken because I had a hard copy. So I hope my dad left one before he passed up in the den at the house we have still on that left coast of the United States. But it was called Acid Rain and the Emergence of Pollution Control Technologies. And I have in fact, I think I wrote a little memoir of it because um, I wanted to at least have a memory of the thing. And I think I'm going to pull it up here. I think I've got it here on my computer. I just want to read that because that was this was really the beginning of what we're doing, and it started on a moral foundation. And yeah, here it is. This is just a short write up. I just wrote a couple paragraphs on it because I'm trying to get copies, through the sabotage we had of the essay. And I remember it because at the time I was just doing what I was naturally curious about and I thought was really relevant, and I still do. And what's kind of funny is that I was doing this. I think it was, yeah, I wrote it on a computer and then had a printout, but this is before the days of even, I mean, Adobe was around. I think that's how I submitted it. But, it was just before a lot of the word processing, and it wasn't a big document. I think it was like 10 or 12 pages, maybe even 9 or something. And it was just it was for I'll never forget it. It was called the Ethics and Professionalism Contest, and it was pretty neat. And I read that and I thought, you know what, I'm going to write about pollution control at power plants because I was right there in it, designing the technologies, getting the air permits all around it, and I was seeing ways to do it better. And so I took it upon myself, and in real time, like every project we've ever done, we set new standards for air emissions. It's a term, anybody familiar, called best available control technology. Well, we're at a point now in our systems, our BACT backed is zero, none, no emissions at all. You say, well, that's impossible. I get people all the time say that. Really? Is photosynthesis impossible? Right? Carbon dioxide plus water, I'm sorry, carbon dioxide plus, no, yeah, carbon dioxide plus, here, I'm losing it myself here too. Carbon dioxide plus, it's light, the photon hits it, and it's, what am I trying to say here? I'm losing my own chemistry here. I get getting all wound up. Because the byproducts are sugar plus water. It's um, just a second. I'm gonna laughing at myself here because here the old photosynthesis equation. It's so elementary and it's great. And one of the great things about it, because that's what we do, is we transform carbon dioxide into something useful, and the NOx and SOx and VOCs and everything else. Yeah, it's CO2 and water plus light energy produces the sugar and oxygen, right? Obviously. So I was right on track there. And what's cool is the oxygen, sunlight hits it and it can turn to ozone. So it's a great balance. And then the cool part is respiration or combustion is truly the opposite. You take oxygen plus a fuel, a carbohydrate or a hydrocarbon, back into CO2 and water. And what's funny is that the exact chemical equation that takes place, like in an engine or turbine, is exactly the same chemical equation that takes place in the human body of any living mammal. That respiration is the same as combustion. It's energy transfer, right? Adenosine triphosphate and all those mechanisms and mitochondria and cell activity and stuff. It's what's driving that, and it's the carbon is the element of life, and it's the this wonderful material of that we call graphene, which is a big part of our business plan. It's just a natural process of the value of optimized heat, light, and mass. And it's really pretty amazing because we still run into people that say, well, that's impossible. You can't do, or they'll come in and say, oh, you're doing pyrolysis. Well, that's not pollution free. And it's like, we never said it was. It's a system. These all have more than one piece. And the waste from one thing, carbon dioxide, becomes the fuel for the next one, photosynthesis, that then leads to algae production. Moss, we're looking into also rapid growing, you know, rootless, stemless biomass growth, then can be pyrolyzed. It's additional fuel. And the cycle continues. That's the Daryl 360 process. Everything goes in, it's everything to graphene. But what is relevant there is that we're just mimicking natural science, and we're just connecting all the dots. And it's kind of mind-boggling, though, how in the greatest needs in human history, we're over 8 billion people now, and we need more, right? The hockey stick curve. We need as much food in the next 3 decades as the prior 3 millennia. Think about that. It's 100 times more food production. And aquaponics does 50 times more right on its own. Waste heat from power plants, 50 times more food using 95 less land, reduction in land and water usage. And, even when we get into like the blockchain space and stuff, that you bet there's fighting. We're here fight. We've taken the gloves off because you know what? That's not crazy. We are not the crazy ones. We're coming out with answers for the human race that are couched in a business plan that says everyone can win, including jobs. And we're super excited. We're seeing that coming out in some advancements that are coming forward. And I know everybody says, when are the dividends for the tokens and everything? The reality is they're coming, and they are coming. It's embedded in our business plan. And the cool part is that they'll come as we move. It's based on profits. We need to get some money moving. We did, and I don't mince words about it anymore. I mean, for a while it was like the gaslighting, you got to apologize, or what's wrong with these guys, whatever. We got into the blockchain because we wanted to raise money for building this business. People said, what do you mean by that? I said, just like you would in the stock market, right? You sell shares in your business to raise money to go build your business. But if you don't really have a business, that whole language is just weird. And a lot of people don't think that with blockchain stuff. They're like, this isn't a real business. What are these guys really doing? And all these other things. Well, that because we are a real business, and it's funny. I even looked at. I'll talk about that some too. We're going to kind of get into some of those things that the AI programs are just haters. We as a company, I'm going to talk about the DEFCON a lot here in a minute, and I know we're just filling space. I'm going to shoot them. Hang on, I want to shoot a message out to our teams group. I think they're surprised I was on time. I'm going to shoot something into our team Concentric here about being online. Just a minute here, and let them know. Um, and what's cool though is that the this whole concept of using those funds to build a real business, then kick dividends back to stakeholders for the investment they made. That's core to the stock market. That's what built up American, ingenuity and economy. Because if the other thing too is you get people involved, then a guy can be a stakeholder in a business. He doesn't have to be in that business. We get so confused. I'll tell people we're doing here's how we've reframed ourselves. We went for some rebranding and we're still working on it. And this is what's fun. And I want to tell everybody regarding this capitalization. We've got about 6, 7, or 8, maybe even 10 entities that have finally gotten it. And I don't know what the real trigger's been. We had one banking guy finally said, you have the ability to make graphene and mass like that. And he said, yeah. He goes, what are we waiting for? It's like, yeah, that's what we kept asking you. Like, he goes, I researched, I looked into that, and whoa, that's a big deal. It's like, yeah, that's what we've been trying to say. It's like, and it's a byproduct of making electricity. And then the byproduct also is the heat for aquaponics and the electricity for aquaponics and all these different things going on that are just integrating the heat to dry incoming fuel and the CO2 to make algae to drop in and then catalyze it too. Pyrolyze it back into more graphene. It's just an ongoing process. People say, what's pyrolysis? It's heat and fuel up without oxygen. It's not that hard. In fact, nature does it anyway. When you look at like a wood fire where you see the blue flame, it's all that wood's done is give off its gases. Well, the oxygen is right there. In a minute, it catches flame and goes orange. But just imagine if you had no oxygen, we could still heat it. It doesn't burn. You collect those gases and go burn them somewhere else, clean them up and use it for an engine or turbine or whatever. Then you can control the waste heat. Everything's way more efficient than just heating up steam for a steam turbine the first time. We actually run that fuel through an engine or turbine and then use the waste heat to pre-dry incoming fuel, collect that water and leachate water, distill it, make pure water out of it, make steam, run it through a steam turbine to get the energy content back out, and then condense it back down in an air-cooled condenser. So there's no losses even out to the atmosphere. And you have potable water, add minerals for taste and, all the things those, you do after RO anyway, ozone and, UV light, all that stuff can go in there. And those things are marginal costs when you're backed up on a power plant, especially when you're making graphene now. And so the cool part about all that is that it's just natural science coming together. And it's kind of mind blowing how the world has kind of been, well, how does it, it's not even so much how does it work? It's just that can't work. Those are outrageous claims, and then people always want the third party deal. It's like, what am I, chopped liver? I've got a PE license. I signed an oath that if I lie, I could go to prison in the state of Tennessee for violating my PE license. But see, you got a culture in America, at least, that people don't even give a rat about any kind of ethics. It's a joke. So people think, well, that doesn't matter. It mattered to me. I remember the day I got passed my exam, did really well on that, get my PE license, and it was a one-page document and I had to sign it and mail it back in or whatever. I was in Tennessee, then I was back in Oregon, and that's where I took the test, was in Tennessee, I think, and I mailed it in. And I remember reading it, and it was just one page. It's kind of like a plaque looking thing. It was cool. And I thought, wow, this is neat. And it kind of had that thing like I've had friends, I'm not into martial arts. I have tons of respect for it and all those things. But, like you ever notice people who are really black belts aren't violent because they know what they can do with it. And they're not there to go out and bully people because it's like, well, I could kill you right now. I know how to do that. So I'm not going to. That's part of being a black belt. It's not just Rex Kwon Do or whatever, that kind of thing. And so same with a PE license. With that responsibility, you realize, hey, I could do things here that could harm people if I'm negligent. I could also do things that help people if I'm responsible. And that matters. It still does to me. And it's funny though, we're in a culture, America is anyway, I'm not there right now, but where people doubt that. Well, why would you say that? You know what? You know why I say these things and the moral ethic? You know why we have a DEFCON? To develop, engineer, finance, construct, operate, maintain plants and stay in there and use them and build them and run them. Because we get a lot of financiers saying, what's your exit strategy? And I just get to one and say, hey, here's the canned answer. We have invested money and we're making huge profits while solving serious world problems and improving life in communities. You know what? I don't want to exit that, and I'm not going to apologize for it anymore. just sick and tired of having to say, why are you so moral about it? You can call it morality, and that is important. But you know what? If you don't even have morality, at least be good at creating wealth. I was telling one of the Cheyenne Parsadhouse just this past week, uh, J. Paul Getty uh, got all that on there. Uh, it's YouTube. Here, Tony's trying to get in. Um, um, Channel. Uh, I'm going to hang on one second. Talita, pardon me for just a second. Some people are asking on the link about how to go get on this. And there's not really a link like Google Meet. I think you just go to YouTube and it's on there. Can you help them out? Just you see, I think whoever that is there, just so people can understand, that would be great. Thank you for that. And yeah, we're still some old school. We're more welders and pipe fitters, and yeah, some PLC programmers. But what I was talking about was J. Paul Getty, because a lot of people think, oh, he's a terrible guy, and there's that movie about his son who got kidnapped, and they make him look real bad there, kind of, and all this stuff. But he had a great book called How to Be Rich, and he wasn't a perfect man. Don't get me wrong. He was a wildcatter, though. His dad developed that, three beveled gear drill bit. We think of a fluted drill bit that just spins and goes straight down. Well, to get the material out, that's not that efficient. And the real it was a big deal in industry was you had the gear coming down to drive to rotate, and your actual drilling mechanism is that three beveled gear that's spinning and rotating, chewing up stuff and be able to drill down. And that was revolutionary. And his father invented that. And then he went out as a wildcatter, and great stories, sleeping in the car, all that stuff, just, working and out in the fields before they had, the ability to analyze where the wells were. But one of the cool things with him is when he was the wealthiest man in the world. I don't know which year. It's maybe like 1958 or something. And he, in the book, he wrote about it. His most proud accomplishment is that he helped create more millionaires than any other businessman up until that time. And that's really what success is. You're breeding success over and over. And, that's what this is about. And so the thing is in the crypto space, it kind of turned into this thing: when are dividends getting paid, as if we have to do that to prove we're real. And trust me, we want to, but the reality is we were in the process of raising capital. We've got this amazing backstory. It's really kind of sick in some ways, and then it's kind of a glorious thing coming out of it, where we had a great business, finally. And Cheyenne, thank you for great new partner of ours, just a dear friend already, and a guy who just awesome worldview. He was kind of like telling me, like, man, you've done 128 plants, you've done all this stuff. I don't see it on the website. Well, we took it off of there. We're trying to just kind of figure out how to talk to you. He goes, tell them who you are. So we did. If you look at all our websites now, the opening paragraph gets right into it. And we ran some statistics, because I kept saying, hey, we're in the upper echelon of the world. Do you know that the number, like when you talk number of people who've done the projects we've done, that I've been a part of historically, it's like 0.0003% of all professional people, even way deeper compared to the whole world. Okay. And then when you whittle it down to people who then have consolidated their experience into all three fields: energy, food, and water production, agriculture, energy, and water, and then put together streamlined protocols to solve that, I was blown away. And I verified through a bunch of different, venues to have the statistics checked. It's less than a dozen people on earth that have the experience we bring. So when I got agitated in the blockchain space for people gaslighting me, I know why. Because it's like, whoa, you're picking on the wrong guy. You're kicking the gift horse in the mouth. And a lot of people can still say the same thing. You know what? We want to raise capital more than you can imagine. And we're doing it. It's why we're staying the course for it. And the DEFCON is a business construct where we now own and operate the plants, and we'll have ongoing revenue. And that gives us the ability to then automatically go capitalize the next deal. See, I realized that not only being vulnerable enough to be taken off the playing field with respect to um, the way that I got literally taken off the playing field, everything stolen. It's like, whoa, the construction arm gone. We didn't have the recurring revenues that people were going to come back and bark for. Several of my partners at the time did file counterclaims and lawsuits in with the state of Washington, saying, "Look, you just sandbagged a company that I'm owner of," and it's amazing. We're recouping that even as we speak as part of the goal. It's why the litigation's out there. And but the in the United Nations, but the number one thing, the point there is that as we move forward, I already knew we wanted to be an owner operator. That was AES's model, and it's also, especially now, that much more important because raising capital is a bear. It's so foolish, and it's sad too because you can, and I know the drill. I'm a licensed professional engineer. I know what accountants and lawyers go through, and it's great. You can bring out all the red tape and say, "Oh, it's got to have this and the belts and suspenders and three different styles of coveralls, and you need to have 16 different belts and four suspenders," and it never ends. Pretty soon it's like the guy can't even walk. He's like the Michelin man, but his pants aren't going to fall down. And it's like, really, is that the goal? I was just like, what are we doing as a culture? And it's been the demise of America. I'll stand by that all the time. The apathy. Guys criticize me for apathy. Don't be apathetic. Don't sit there and do nothing. But doing nothing's not an option. And what's happened is that banking's become so difficult because all the banks want is a guarantee. They just want somebody to sign off on some. The projects don't matter anymore. And the last vestige of companies that did loans based on the value of the project, like GE Capital, they're gone. They frauded themselves out of the thing. So the point is, I said, we got to be a DEFCON. We got to own these plants. We'll extract our own profits. And then guess what? We never have to look for money again. We could still, amplify it. And we have ways to do that right now. McKinley Investment, one of our partners, 90% investment. They bring insurance policies to guarantee the 10% bridge capital. We're going to be our own 10% bridge capital next time. See, that's what's going to be fun here. I think it's been kind of the dilemma that people think we're going to always have to be looking for bridge capital or loans. We just need to break through one time. And for anybody out there listening, we got one project that's the prior pyrolysis plant that, for reasons out of our control, the client who had it, I guess, went out of business and, COVID, whatever. So we picked up the pyrolysis equipment for cents on a dollar. And we're shipping that up to Yorkshire, England, where it's going to be recommissioned. And so, again, instead of a $20 million capex, which is our nominal overall setup for this 72-ton-a-day module, which generates hundreds of millions a year in net earnings, super rapid feedback. And we continue to model it as bad as we can. And we just can't make it really any worse than like a 3 to 6 month payback, which is absurd for this whole industry. Normally 3 to 6 years is okay. And we got investors say those paybacks are too fast. It's like, come on. You can launder money 9 ways to Sunday, 7 ways to Sunday. But you're telling me if you got too much money too soon, you couldn't find something to do with it, like reinvest it and do more? I mean, where's the thought process there? I mean, just bizarre, unbelievable. People have asked me, like, what would we do if we funded you $2 billion? I said, I'd have to cut 90% of our list off. Because what we did is we went out and jam packed a funnel full of projects, and the world's in need big time. So this is going to really take, and we've planted those seeds. We've laid in the groundwork, and we've now made proposals to over 100 countries, over half the world. And so that DEFCON thing's important because in that we also make money on the construction. We have a construction margin built in. There's buffer there. And so it's part of the overall margin of these projects. So we have, those are operating earnings from our engineering activities. In a pure linear world, we'd say it's $20 million. It's really like 15, the gross cost, and we just leave the 5 million in its profits and reinvest in the next deal, or dividends back to the token holders. And both really is what it's going to be, because that's how a that's what you do as a company. You take some profits, you give it back to stakeholders, you reinvest some, you re-leverage everything. It's a moving dynamic thing. And I think that's been hard for some people to realize, because maybe their exposure to business is, you're going to have a store and you've got to staff it, and you don't really grow. You just have a store or a franchise like a McDonald's or whatever. And nothing wrong with those franchises. Great idea. A cookie cutter business model. We've got that built into ours too. With this renewable electric arc pyrolysis, really kind of was the missing piece to pull it all together. Before we had very similar technologies, but this time everything applies and still integrated with the power generation with everything else in there. And that's where, I think some people want to come in and say, well, how does it work and stuff? It works with a bunch of different pieces of equipment that are integrated like an automobile. I mean, think about it, like the differential gear, how a real rear wheel can turn, the rear axle with the differential gear lets a car turn a circle without all the chatter. Well, the early, like, horse wagons and stuff didn't have those. And that's why you had to take you had a difficult time taking turns. And then guys were looking at bearings and eventually a differential gear. And the Chinese actually had it way before. So it give you ability to take a radius there while you're turning the front wheels. The back ones can rotate at a different speed, and the gear absorbs that. And so what ends up happening is then you add a transmission and an engine, and you got wheels and a chassis. Well, what if there's a new engine? What, like a Model T engine way back, were what, like 8 horsepower? And that was like you could go what, 30 miles an hour, 25, whatever, without having to exercise. You just put your foot on the pedal. It was cool. Well, those engines now, I mean, you wouldn't even run a lawnmower with it because pieces got better. Does that mean the first cars were bad? No, it's advancing technology. This proxy we have is just bizarre. Like we run some pyrolysis plants and we show how it works, and we got video footage and there's offtake and people want to go see one so they know how it works. And I can appreciate that, but do you really need to see that work to like get it? Like what do you, at some point, like someone's already made an investment to build a plant. They're making another investment to build another one. And we've got like umbrella approval for major project finance. Alliance Insurance will back that up. At some point, someone down the line, like, Bill over here, has to say, you know what, my analysis is redundant. And they'll say, well, I need to understand all of it so I can then go tell the people with money and stuff. And it just becomes this endless road of middlemen, and none of whom understand any of it. And then the end game is called the scientist crazy. I've received a lot of compliments this last couple of years, especially about, because I had to finally realize who I am. And unfortunately, this polymathism is really rare, which blew me away. I thought everybody thought like that. What, that great song by, what's the band, Metric? Kind of a cool tune. It's called "Oh Please." And I remember hearing the lyrics one time. It's like, something to the effect of, I just thought this is like everyone thought like this. I'm going to look up the lyric, but because I want to tell that's how I thought. That's kind of how a high functioning autistic and Aspergian looks at things. You think something, it's like, well, everybody sees this. It's in living color. Wow, this is cool. And you turn around and everybody's like, watching television or popping balloons or something. You just didn't even know what you were looking at. And as I don't even realize that until I was labeled that, and then I could look at it and say, well, what does that mean? And then Hans Asperger says that's a great, like, element of creativity that allows people to look at the world a little bit different. And I started to embrace it. And when Nathan, one of my sons, I love you, Nathan, he's like, it's your superpower, Dad, and it's cool. And so you start to embrace that, and then you can look at things more like that. Talita supports that. She's like, well, yeah, you can look at it that way. Why wouldn't you? She's been with me for some of the real breakthroughs, and we really integrated stuff together, like the Dariel patent, and even the one before that with the combined cycle. Because see, we take the flue gas from a power plant and run it back through to create more fuel out of the waste. And the I'm gonna do that. I want to tell, because it's like that thing, the "Oh Please" lyrics. I got to get that right because it's worth seeing what that lyric was, and then I'm going to read that thing about the that uh, advanced ASME paper on pollution control, and I want to show that because sometimes it's a worldview. Francis Schaeffer talked about it. Anybody does, like the Chuck Colson too. You have this thing here. Um, Here it is. Here's the theme. Where are we here? Let me find this. I will find it here. I've got the lyrics. Here it comes. Just a second. Uh, Let me check your time. Uh, let's see here. I'm not seeing that lyric. I haven't really looked at these. That doesn't look like the same. So, oh, it's a different song by somebody else. Hang on here. Uh, Find it. Sorry, everybody. That's why it didn't come together. Because I want to go through that because I think this is important to comprehend. Um, yeah. Oh, please. The great lyrics here. It's a great song if you get a chance to listen to it. Oh, please don't attempt to placate me or decide in advance how the chorus should go. Pure fear is a common theme through line. Most don't even hope to approach the threshold. And old souls cry like a baby. I still willfully ignorant live. I paint the walls in slim shady. Hell stalls forever, whatever it is. It got bad. It got so bad lately. Wildfires underperform. Centerfolds to inflate, exaggerate greatly. Stoke fear to drive the directionless home. Kind of some, Tull-like lyrics. And this is the line. I thought this was just what everyone did. I thought this is just how everyone lived. And again, I thought this was just what everyone did. I thought this was just how everyone lived. And if I'm guilty of something, it's that. Because I just thought people want to prosper and succeed. And why I bring this up too, and I want to say it in another thing, and I love Micah Stoitano. He used me as a case study in his he wrote a great book and he called it a different thing than Osbergian, but I want to he won an award up at University of Washington for this, and it was a really cool write-up. And I'm going to find that here in a second too. But why I bring that up is because if there's any defining thing about concentric industries, is that we haven't adopted to the limitations. I get a lot of feedback where people say, you got to write this out and explain what it's going to do and everything. And I show up at meetings and it's like, do people really need to go through the last 50 years of what we've gone through to come up with this as a business answer? Or can they just say, hey, we need something different and better? You've put all the work in, let's go do that. And I know, money's the equalizer. People say, well, if you had $1 billion and 8,700 plants running and you were not just in the 0.00003% of the world, but you were like 1 out of 8 billion, then we might believe you. Yeah, and you know what's funny? It's because here's the deal. When we have this modular plant single unit, this 72 ton per day unit, and we finally dug into the metrics. We got a thing frequently asked questions and answers about graphene. And we knew when we looked at it that most of the graphene production is kind of in a laboratory and groups, great groups, James Tour and the guys up in Toronto, they're working to get something commercially viable to do 1 ton a day. And we got a thing that can make, 4 to 8 out of the, 72 tons coming in of any organic material. And so we realized, whoa, what are the numbers? And we realized that if we get 6 of our units in, we will be not just the biggest mass producer of graphene in the world, but more than the rest of the world combined. And we have 20,000 of our units in back order for coal plants and other retrofits. So at some point, when does somebody say, you know what? That's going to define the industry. So rather than nickel and diamond in there and saying, well, how does it work? And what is this? And what about the power purchase price? And we have 6 revenue streams. So no one of them makes all that difference. In fact, you could take graphene out and we still have the most efficient, lucrative power systems ever because we make money off selling the heat and the food produced from the greenhouse and all these other things that are just simple polymathism. And people say, well, I heard greenhouses don't work. What? Photosynthesis is not viable. I mean, come on. You just get this stuff that just because Harry down the road doesn't do it, doesn't mean that it doesn't work. I had a Kimball Musk, Elon's brother. Neat guy. He's in the food industry, has some great writings. I've tried to reach out to him. I had a guy today, probably a scammer. There's my private WhatsApp. It's Elon Musk or Kimball Musk. I'm finally getting back to you. I said, oh, really? I hope it is you. I said, my wife's from the town, the region you guys are from. And Talita said he's kind of waiting, looking it up or something. Pretoria, South Africa. It's like, okay, that must mean it's you. So just weird. Who knows? Maybe it is. I don't know because we've reached out to him. Because here's why. Kimball goes in and does some aquaponic stuff like 15, 20 years ago. He says, wow, this is awesome. Your food's produced right there at the point of usage, no wastage. You harvest every week. This is awesome. But the energy costs are high. We got to maintain temperature and the electric loads and all this other stuff. And we'd already started integrating it with our power plants. And we're over there saying, wait a minute, put that next to a power plant and your costs are negligible. You're a byproduct of the waste of that system, heat and some power. And then you put the CO2 in to recover algae. Now that comes back in as a feedstock. It could be fuel, for humans too and animals. You got options in all this. And then we've had some it's funny too, because when you pyrolyze or gasify the fuel, when you turn it into a gas fuel instead of just burning wood or coal or garbage, we make a gaseous fuel out of it. And then you have options. You can either use the gas as fuel for power generation or gas, renewable natural gas, or synthesize it into liquid fuels. And people say, oh, how much of that can you make? As much as we want in either direction. We don't divide the energy balance, but we can make power or liquid fuels, jet fuel or electricity. So we get people coming in saying, well, we need to have tipping fees and a high power purchase price to do waste energy. Do you know how much sense that doesn't make in our equation anymore? And I know that equation because the first 42 waste energy plants we built had that equation because we were a burn and boil system, burning trash to make steam, to make a steam turbine. And we had the waste emissions control. I'm going to read this article here in a second. We had all that stuff going on. And I thought, man, there's a lot of money being spent for compliance. How can we turn those waste streams into something valuable? And then after a while, you're like, wait a minute. Carbon dioxide's the driver for food production. Why are we making that the villain all the time? I mean, just something's just wrong. Something is just really, really the matter with that. And so I'm still finding this one. It's a cool thing that Micus wrote, and I will find it. And while I'm still talking about these things, because what we did is it's called polymathism. And it's how nature works. The waste of one product becomes the feedstock for another. And so what happened here, I'm gonna do still on here. Am I, or did I cut off? Talita, am I still on? Oh, there we go. Okay, the timer's still going. Good. I'm still here. Um, I want to find this other one. And then I'm going to read that article for you guys because I'm coming up on the hour. I know I've kind of been going, and like I said, we're going to get guests. We're going to have other speakers. We're going to do these shows from job sites and all kinds of other different things. So I appreciate your patience in this. It's just kind of listening to me sort of ramble on stuff. I'll try to answer some questions. Hi to everybody. Appreciate you being there. Um, and who are you talking to about Concentric in the world right now? That's a good question. We're in 6 continents. We've got businesses registered in all 6 of those. All kinds of stuff coming on. We know capitalization's been our weak link. We know why it is. We had to restart over, but that doesn't mean the science doesn't work. It doesn't mean these things aren't feasible and viable. And I need to find that article about the that it's just another one liner. I've got the flyer in my phone. I get all these different placards and one liners, and sometimes I lose track of them. I've got them all in a big folder, and I'll find it here. I really appreciate people's notion. I want you to know there's depth to this organization, and that's what really matters here because we're not just winging it. These things are very much on purpose. Here it is. It's the Auspian Manifesto. And this is what he called Micus Titano. He won some awards at Washington State or University of Washington up in Seattle for this. He calls them CIPP, a cultural independent psychological processing. Okay, that's a term he came up with this. And I said, well, that's an Auspian, Asperger. He says CIPPs or Asperger's do not imagine a limit to their possibilities because these persons never clued into the culture limits in the first place. And when I read that, I cried. And he goes, "That's you, man. You don't even know the boundaries because you never